What happens when Hollywood's most iconic secret agent meets late-night television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when Daniel Craig sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview. The explosive confrontation that erupted last night has sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry, with footage already going viral across social media platforms. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two titans clash in the most dramatic talk show moment of the year. The atmosphere in the Jimmy Kimmel live studio was electric, as Daniel Craig made his entrance to thunderous applause. The British actor, known for his portrayal of James Bond, appeared composed and professional as he settled into the guest chair. What started as typical celebrity banter quickly transformed into something far more sinister when Kimmel decided to veer off script. "So Daniel, I have to ask," Kimmel began with his trademark smirk, "there's been a lot of talk about your comments regarding Bond and diversity. Some people are saying you've been pretty resistant to change in the franchise." The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon, and Craig's expression immediately shifted from relaxed to guarded. Craig straightened in his chair, his jaw tightening visibly. "I'm sorry, Jimmy, but I think you're mischaracterizing my position entirely. I've always been supportive of the Bond franchise evolving and growing with the times." His voice carried a warning tone that seasoned talk show watchers would recognize as the first sign of trouble brewing, but Kimmel wasn't backing down. Instead, he leaned forward with the predatory instincts of someone who sensed vulnerability. "Come on, Daniel. We've all seen the interviews where you seemed pretty dismissive about the idea of a female Bond or changing the character's traditional, let's call them methods, with women." The audience shifted uncomfortably as the tension in the room became palpable. "That's not what I said, and you know it," Craig responded, his British accent becoming more pronounced as his irritation grew. "You're taking my words completely out of context, and frankly, I find it disappointing that you'd ambush me with this kind of tabloid journalism on what's supposed to be an entertainment show." The camera caught Kimmel's eyes lighting up with the kind of gleeful malice that suggested he was enjoying every second of Craig's discomfort. "Ambush? Daniel, these are your own words. I'm just asking you to clarify them for our audience." His tone was mockingly innocent, but there was something darker lurking beneath the surface. Craig's hands gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles whitening as he struggled to maintain his composure. "Jimmy, I came here tonight to talk about my latest project, not to be subjected to some kind of trial by media. If you have specific quotes you'd like to discuss, then present them accurately instead of twisting them to create controversy where none exists." The studio audience was now completely silent, sensing that something unprecedented was unfolding before their eyes. Even the usually animated crowd seemed to understand that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Kimmel's band members exchanged worried glances as their leader pressed forward with his attack. "Look, I'm just trying to understand your perspective," Kimmel continued, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're pretty attached to keeping Bond exactly the way he's always been. Some might call that outdated thinking." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and Craig's response would determine whether this interview could be salvaged or if it was about to spiral completely out of control. The veteran actor's face was a mask of barely contained fury as he processed what had just been said to him on live television. The tension had reached a breaking point, and everyone in the studio could feel that something explosive was about to happen. What came next would change everything, as Craig prepared to respond to what he clearly viewed as a personal attack on his character and values, setting the stage for a confrontation that would make television history. Craig's voice dropped to a dangerously low register, the kind of tone that made audiences remember why he was so convincing as a lethal secret. "Agent? Jimmy? I think you need to be very careful about the accusations you're making on live television. I've spent 15 years bringing dignity to a character that means everything to millions of people around the world, and I won't sit here and let you paint me as some kind of backwards-thinking relic." The camera operators instinctively zoomed in closer, capturing every micro-expression as the confrontation reached a new level of intensity. Kimmel, however, seemed to feed off the tension like a parasite, his grin widening as he sensed he had struck a nerve. "Dignity? Is that what we're calling it now? Because I remember reading about your comments regarding the Bond girls, and how you thought the character shouldn't have to apologize for being a man's man." "You're deliberately misrepresenting everything I've said," Craig shot back, his composure finally beginning to crack. "I've never said anything remotely close to what you're suggesting, and the fact that you're willing to fabricate quotes to create drama shows exactly what kind of host you really are." The accusation of fabrication hit Kimmel like a slap across the face, and for the first time since the interview began, his smug expression faltered. The studio fell into an even deeper silence as both men stared at each other across the desk, the air thick with hostility. Kimmel's producers, in the control room, were frantically gesturing, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the train wreck continue. "Fabricate?" Kimmel's voice rose an octave, his mask of professionalism finally slipping completely. "I don't need to fabricate anything, Daniel. Your reputation speaks for itself. Everyone knows you've been difficult to work with, demanding, and completely resistant to any suggestions about modernizing the Bond character." Craig stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward as he towered over the desk. The sudden movement caused several audience members to gasp audibly, and security personnel stationed around the studio tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. "Now you're calling me difficult? On your own show? In front of all these people?" "If the shoe fits," Kimmel replied with a shrug that seemed calculated to inflict maximum insult. "I mean, let's be honest here, Daniel. You've made it pretty clear that you were ready to be done with Bond for years. Maybe it's time to admit that you were never really the right fit for a character that needs to evolve with the times." The personal attack was so blatant, so deliberately cruel, that even Kimmel's most loyal audience members began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't comedy anymore. This was character assassination being broadcast live to millions of viewers. Craig's hands clenched into fists at his sides as he processed the full weight of what had just been said to him. "You want to question my fitness for a role that I've dedicated years of my life to perfecting?" Craig's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the menace of a man who had reached his absolute breaking point. "A role that required me to perform my own stunts, to push my body to its limits, to bring depth and complexity to a character that could have easily been one-dimensional." Kimmel leaned back in his chair, apparently enjoying the chaos he had created. "Hey, I'm just saying what everyone else is thinking. Maybe it's time for someone younger, someone more in touch with what audiences actually want to see." The insult about his age was the final straw, and Craig's face transformed into something that reminded everyone watching why he had been so convincing as a cold-blooded killer on screen. The veteran actor's years of professional training were the only thing preventing him from doing something that would end both their careers in that moment. What happened next would push their confrontation past the point of no return, as Craig prepared to deliver a response that would expose Kimmel's true nature to the world. Craig's voice cut through the studio like a blade, each word delivered with surgical precision. "You want to talk about being in touch with audiences, Jimmy? Let's talk about your ratings. Let's talk about how you've built your entire career on cheap shots and manufactured controversy, because you lack the talent to create genuine entertainment." The color drained from Kimmel's face as Craig's counterattack hit its mark. The audience, who had been uncomfortably silent, began to murmur as they realized they were witnessing something unprecedented, a guest turning the tables on their host with devastating effectiveness. Kimmel's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, clearly caught off guard by the sudden reversal. "You sit behind that desk night after night, taking pot shots at people who are actually creating something meaningful," Craig continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. While you're making jokes about other people's work, I've been out there doing the actual job. The stunts, the emotional scenes, the physical demands that you couldn't handle for 5 minutes. Kimmel finally found his voice, but it came out as a strangled croak. Daniel, I think you're overreacting here. This is just a conversation between professionals. His attempt to regain control of the situation was pathetic, and everyone in the studio could see it. Professionals, Craig laughed, but there was no humor in it. You ambushed me with fabricated quotes, questioned my professionalism, attacked my age, and suggested I was never right for a role that I've been universally praised for. That's not professional, Jimmy. That's the behavior of a bully who's gotten too comfortable hiding behind his desk. The word bully hung in the air like an indictment, and several audience members actually gasped at the directness of the accusation. Kimmel's producers were now frantically trying to signal him to change course, but their host seemed frozen, unable to process that his carefully constructed persona was being systematically dismantled on live television. I've worked with some of the most demanding directors in Hollywood, Craig pressed on, his British accent giving his words an aristocratic authority that made Kimmel look even smaller by comparison. I've collaborated with Academy Award winners. I've helped create films that have grossed billions of dollars worldwide. And you have the audacity to sit there and question my fitness for the role? Kimmel's trademark smirk had completely disappeared, replaced by something that looked disturbingly like panic. Look, Daniel, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Why don't we just move on to talking about your new project? Oh, now you want to change the subject? Craig's voice dripped with contempt. After you've spent the last 10 minutes trying to tear down my reputation for your own twisted entertainment? I don't think so, Jimmy. I think we're just getting started. The studio audience was now completely captivated, some members actually leaning forward in their seats as they watched their host being systematically destroyed by his own guest. The power dynamic had shifted so completely that even the crew members seemed to be taking sides, with several nodding in agreement with Craig's assessment. You know what the real problem is, Jimmy? Craig leaned forward across the desk, invading Kimmel's personal space in a way that made the host visibly uncomfortable. You've spent so long making fun of other people's work that you've forgotten what it's like to actually create something. You've become a parasite, feeding off the accomplishments of others because you don't have any real talent of your own. The accusation was so brutal, so precisely targeted, that Kimmel actually flinched as if he'd been physically struck. His face had gone completely pale, and beads of sweat were beginning to form on his forehead. The confident, smarmy host who had started this confrontation had been replaced by a man who looked like he was about to have a panic attack on live television. That's not, Kimmel stammered, but Craig wasn't finished with him yet. You want to know what's really outdated, Jimmy? It's this whole setup. It's the idea that you can invite someone onto your show and then attack them for your own amusement. It's the notion that because you have a platform, you can say whatever you want about people who are actually out there doing the work. The devastating critique was building to something even more explosive, as Craig prepared to deliver the final blow that would end this confrontation once and for all. Craig straightened to his full height, his presence commanding the entire studio, as he prepared to deliver what would become one of the most quoted moments in talk show history. You know what, Jimmy? I've had enough. I came here tonight as a favor to your producers, thinking I was going to have a civilized conversation about my work. Instead, I find myself dealing with a man who clearly has no respect for his guests, no integrity as a host, and apparently no shame about ambushing people for cheap laughs. Kimmel's face had gone from pale to ashen, his eyes darting desperately toward his producers for some kind of lifeline that wasn't coming. The man who had seemed so confident and in control just minutes earlier now looked like he was drowning in front of his own audience. His hands were visibly shaking as he gripped the edge of his desk. This is what passes for entertainment in your world, isn't it? Craig continued, his voice rising with righteous anger. attacking people who can't defend themselves, twisting their words, creating controversy where none exists. You've turned what should be a celebration of creativity into a gladiator arena where you're the only one with weapons. The audience was completely silent now, mesmerized by the complete destruction of their host's credibility happening before their eyes. Some were recording on their phones, instinctively understanding that they were witnessing television history. The camera operators continued filming, capturing every devastating moment of Kimmel's public humiliation. "You called me difficult, Jimmy. You questioned my professionalism. You suggested I wasn't right for Bond." Craig's voice carried the authority of someone who had spent years commanding film sets and working with the industry's biggest names. "But let me tell you what's really difficult. Sitting here listening to a man who has never created anything of lasting value tear down the work of people who actually matter." Kimmel tried one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Daniel, please, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. Why don't we just take a breath and—" "No." Craig's single word cut through Kimmel's plea like a sword. "There's no misunderstanding. You showed your true colors tonight, and everyone here saw it. This is who you really are when you think you can get away with it. A small, petty man who builds himself up by tearing others down." The finality in Craig's voice made it clear that this wasn't a negotiation or a discussion anymore. This was a judgment being passed down from someone who clearly considered himself Kimmel's superior in every way that mattered. The host's face crumpled as he realized that nothing he could say would salvage this situation. "I want to thank your audience," Craig said, turning away from Kimmel entirely and addressing the stunned crowd directly. They came here tonight expecting to be entertained, and instead they had to watch their host embarrass himself and his profession. They deserved better than this circus act. The gesture of completely ignoring Kimmel and speaking directly to the audience was the ultimate insult, reducing the host to irrelevance in his own studio. Several audience members actually began to applaud Craig's words, a stunning breach of talk show etiquette that spoke to how thoroughly Kimmel had lost control of his own show. Craig began walking toward the exit, but then stopped and turned back, one final time, delivering the coup de grâce that would be replayed on social media for years to come. "You know what the saddest part is, Jimmy? You had a chance tonight to have a real conversation with someone who's actually accomplished something meaningful. Instead, you chose to reveal yourself as exactly the kind of person that's wrong with this industry. Congratulations. You've just shown millions of people who you really are." With that, Daniel Craig walked off the Jimmy Kimmel Live set, leaving behind a host who looked like he had just been hit by a freight train. The studio remained in stunned silence for several long seconds before Kimmel, his voice barely above a whisper, managed to croak out, "We'll be right back after these messages." But the damage was done. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. Craig vs. Kimmel became the #1 trending topic worldwide, with overwhelming support for the actor's decisive handling of what many viewed as an unprofessional ambush. Kimmel's reputation took an immediate and devastating hit, with sponsors already beginning to distance themselves from the controversy. The incident became a defining moment in talk show history, a perfect example of what happens when manufactured controversy meets genuine class and professionalism. Daniel Craig had not only defended himself, but had exposed the toxic culture of gotcha journalism that had infected late-night television. His dramatic exit from the Jimmy Kimmel Live set would be remembered as the night a real professional showed a pretender exactly where he stood.